Welcome, everybody.
Woohoo!
All right.
Hey
Hello,
now.
hello to another amazing week of our Roundtable podcast. Today we have some special guests with us. We have Pastor Ermi, Pastor Kendra, we have Noah, Sandra, we have Robbie Joe here, and of course we have Pastor Luke, Pastor Casey, and Pastor Lizer joining us today. Thank you all so much for being here. We have a special edition Mother's Day podcast for you
We
all.
love you, moms.
Woo! Love you, Mom.
Uh, it is so great to have you all. I hope you guys are all chiming in. And as always, please feel free to comment in the chat, say hi, and share any comments or anything that you want, any questions that you would love for us to answer. Pastor Luke, would you mind giving us a brief overview of what we spoke about in your daily devotional?
Sure, we're at
your
this section
Bible
where we
study.
start covering a lot of ground really quickly. So it becomes much more factual. So we looked at Paul's first two missionary journeys. He grabs a friend or partner, goes around to a lot of different cities, and essentially goes to the synagogue, preaches about how Jesus fulfills the scriptures, and then finds a group of Gentiles in some way, shape, or form, and does the same thing to them, minus just the old scriptures, and then just goes from place to place to place. And then we kind of charted that entire journey. And he makes like a long trip the first time and comes back, and the second time makes just kind of a big circle. There's a lot of great detail in there that I just kind of quickly jumped over because I knew that our daily devotionals would do a great job of diving deep, which ironically enough is kind of the opposite of the way we started 6 weeks ago.
That's funny.
For sure. And so there's one thing, one major topic out of Acts chapter 16 that we want to hit on today. And essentially it's, we meet a young man named Timothy who is raised by his mother and his grandmother and raised in the faith. And he's well known around the area for his faith. And Paul, just ends up wanting to be kind of like a dad to him, a spiritual father, and ends up taking him as an apprentice and ends up being this amazing church leader and a partner to Paul in the faith, which is amazing. So for the mothers out there, tell us what's one of the funniest moments with you and your mom or as a mom. What's some of the funny moments? Robbie Joe, we'll start with you.
Every day. One of the ones that our house is quite humorous every day, and you have to laugh or else you'll go crazy during this quarantine. But one of the funniest things I can think of is actually, it was a picture I just saw recently of Pastor Steve and myself and Pastor Sterling in Guatemala. And going up these hills, and I had brought I guess she was 11 at the time. And she was having the time of her life, and I was scared to death she was going to fall out of that truck. And she was just having the time of her life. And that's constantly my life is I'm scared to death, and they're having the time of their life. Like yesterday, we went on a hike, and all of a sudden, one of my kids go, that could be where a bear lives, and I lost it. Let's go, I'm the ones, let's go. Like, I was like, but they're having the time of their life, so every day.
That's so funny. I love it. Hey, Casey, what about you?
Oh man, there's a funny memory.
Yeah.
All right, I got a really funny one. One time, I was.
Why do I get the impression I'm gonna be the one laughed at in this?
Makes it even funnier.
No, you're not in this one.
Okay.
I'll spare you. But one time the boys wanted McDonald's, so I got the McDonald's. This was years ago. Levi was wicked little. I don't even remember how old he was. And we're driving home. They're in the back seat, and they're eating, and everything is fine. And then all of a sudden, my oldest got sick. He had to have been sick previously. He got sick, and he ended up throwing up. And his younger brother, instead of being compassionate and looking to see, like, oh my gosh, what happened? Are you okay? Instead, mid-bite with chicken nugget, he looks at him and he's like, Nana, stop it. That's gross.
As he's puking.
As he, and I'm like,
Nuggets.
Stop it.
I'm like, can you like just help him, please? I'm like throwing napkins back there, and Levi's just making sure that his meal is not interrupted.
That's so funny.
So, and
Sandra,
be more sound like that.
what do you think, Sandra? You got a fun one with your kids?
I mean, a lot of things that are funny after the fact of memories that I have with them. I'll actually, even though Noah's here with me, I'll share a story about Christian. When he was little, this kid would take off on me. I think this was before they made leashes for children, but he would take off on me all the time. And we spent a lot of time at the mall. And he took off. I was in the dressing room changing my clothes, and he was in there with me. He went under the door and was gone. So I had to quickly get dressed. I run out in the store, and he's not even there. He's gone. We find him. They call security. Everybody's looking for him. Yeah. And I see him. He's running. This is when the Disney store was at the Buckland Mall, and he's running. The security guard's chasing him, and he's like 2 or 3 years old, and he's laughing hysterically. But that's my funny story. Those are all, I have a lot of those, like Robbie Joe was saying, freak out in the moment, and after the fact, it's like, oh gosh.
That's great. That's great.
Awesome.
Kendra, you got one with your mom or your sibling?
Yes. I mean, I have a lot, but one that I just shared recently, so it's in the top of my brain, is so I grew up a pastor's kid, and so it was very important that we always sat in the front row, right? It's like big deal. And so I have my mom and my sister, just me and my sister for siblings. And so we're sitting there, my mom's in the middle, my sister's on one side, I'm on the other, and it's in the middle of the sermon. So my dad's up there preaching, and somebody toots, passes gas, okay? And so we all kind of smell it at the same time. So we kind of like look at each other at first, like in disgust, but then like we're trying to figure out, was it one of us? And so we just start losing it, my mom included. So I'm laughing, we're looking at each other, we're looking at my dad, seeing if he notices, we're trying to like hide our faces, we're just shaking, laughing. And it was like one of those laughter fits that you just could not control. Like it just wouldn't stop. And so it was just the best. It was the best moment. To this day, I do not know if my dad even realized or not, but it was awesome.
Great. All right. Well, if you have some funny stories, please share them in the chat. That'd be awesome. So moving on into what our real question here. How has your mother influenced your life, influenced your beliefs, your relationships, even your personality? What are some things? Sandra and Noah, we'd love for you to kind of kick that off.
I think generally to like the question of beliefs, a lot of, I think, my interactions with other people and what I believe on first interactions and first impressions comes from my mother. And especially now that I am kind of an adult, I'm seeing a lot more.
He's 21. He's an adult.
I'm seeing a lot more personality that I got from her. I am generally very easygoing, but she always drilled into us as a kid, like, you're always on time. You always do your work. You don't finish until your work is done. Everything is in tip-top shape. And now that, like, when people are not like that, it gets under my skin because she's drilled into me so much. And yeah, I mean, obviously with my mom and my grandma, I think they both had a huge impact on my journey faith-wise. And even when I was, struggling behind the scenes and wouldn't show them, I knew that there is a person that I could ask a question to, or literally walk downstairs and ask my grandma, hey, why did Paul do X, Y, or Z? Or why do people think blah, 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 blah? And she would have like a researched history on why things were that way. So I think they've really encouraged like a spirit of asking questions. in my faith, and so I don't feel like I'm afraid to ask those questions anymore, which has really been a help in like my growth.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sandra, how about raising two boys? How has that been? Oh, Casey too. Casey and Eliza raising two boys.
Yeah. I mean, as a single mom, you know, I made a choice very early on that I would stay home here with my mom to provide a stable environment for them. I didn't want them, you know, all over the place. And going back to kind of what Noah said with my mom, for me, it's the same thing. It's like, well, for me, honestly, growing up, my mom and I butted heads quite a bit. But, you know, her constant, like, she is probably the biggest picture of faith, an example of faith that I look to above anybody else. It's and not always. It's so unwavering, and that has just created, you know, this legacy that will continue to go on and pass from generation to generation. That's, you know, that's my hope anyway. So she's been such a strength in my life and in their lives and helping me raise them, and not just raise them, but really being such an example of faith and what that looks like in our lives. And it just really does, it transcends, because some of the things she says, I'm like, no, you know, she would come in my room when I was a teenager, and this is when my years were, you know, I was living not in the best way, so I'd be up all night, and she'd come in my room and she'd throw open the blinds and she'd say, "This is the day that the Lord has made. We're going to rejoice and be glad in it." And I would just like pull the covers over and be like, "Stop." But you know what? It's those things that you never forget, and they stick with you. And so, yeah, just she's been such a great example of faith in my life and to my children's lives. And that was so important to me. Not, again, just because of all the good things. She's a teacher at heart, so she's good in that way, but really wanting them to learn about the Lord and be just reinforcing what I knew they needed.
That's so good. Pastor Ermi, tell us about how your mother has influenced your life, your beliefs.
Yeah. First, I would like to wish a happy Mother's Day in advance for all of the mothers around the world. And so my mom, growing up, has been a huge influence on my life, because my dad was a military personnel, so he was deployed most of the time. So the responsibility of discipleship at home rested upon my mom. So she was the one who took us to church, and she's the one who taught us the Word of God. And most of all, my mom is a prayer warrior. And to this day, I credit my success in life to my mom's prayer. In fact, there are times when I am in difficult situation. During my prayer, I will say, "Lord, the God of my mother, help me." Because her influence on my life is that strong. So I usually invoke the God of my mother, and it works. Yeah, so she, she was persecuted because I grew up in a communist regime, under a communist regime. And being a Christian in that kind of regime was a sin. So you will be jailed, you will be ridiculed, you will be laughed at. So my mom, endured all of that, so we can love Jesus and we can grow up as Christians. So her influence, not only on me, but also on all of my siblings, is huge. She's the one who taught me how to pray. She's the one who taught me how to study the Word of God. She's the one who inspired me to go into the ministry. And she's also the one who influenced me to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with others. So her influence over my life is immense. And I would like to wish my mom a happy Mother's Day. Yeah, thank you.
Remind me
Mother's
again,
Day to Ermi's mom.
Happy Mother's Day. Remind me again what country you come from.
I'm originally from Ethiopia. It is located in the eastern part of Africa. So yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. That is so cool. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I don't think we can top that.
That's a good one. That definitely is a good one. All right.
Hearing stories like that, though, I do have to say, as a mother, inspire me to be an awesome mom, to try to instill that into my children. So that's a great testimony, and that encourages mothers for sure.
Yeah, you know, I was just going to add too that kind of what Robbie Joe was saying. You know, a lot of times, and I'll say this to moms out there, now having adult children, is that a lot of times, and I was like that, I'm sure my mom was feeling the same way, is you feel like they're not listening to you, but they are. They hear everything, they absorb everything, and they don't forget it. So it'll always come back up, and that, I think that just is something an encouragement I'd like to just throw out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so funny too, because I can't remember what we were talking about, but my sister and I were talking with my mom, and we were recalling a memory that we all had. And to hear the difference in how we remembered the same moment was so interesting, because my mom was like, oh my gosh, the house was a mess, and this was this, and I was so frustrated, and blah, blah, and we were like, that was like our favorite day, and we did this, and you know, this was so fun. And so it's just like, wow, like moms just, they have to know, like, some of that stuff, it doesn't even matter. Like, your kids remember you and how you handled it and your influence. They don't remember the laundry being in a basket. They don't remember that stuff. And so it's encouraging too, I hope, for moms to hear, like, listen, like, you do the best you can and your kids will love you for it.
Robbie Joe and Pastor Luke, is there a big difference between raising your boys and raising your daughter?
Yes.
Is the difference in raising them, or the difference in the way they react in being raised?
Sure.
Oh, maybe.
Everything.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean,
winging it.
I mean, Grace, she's the firstborn, so she's a rule follower. And the boys push the boundaries. They're boys, and they like to push the boundaries. And Grace is a little mommy, right? And the boys are not little daddies. They don't come out little daddies. I don't know, but she is like a little mommy. She's worried where the boys are. And the boys are like, we're boys. There could be bears. Let's go. Grace and I were like sprinting down the mountain yesterday, and the boys were like, okay, if there is a mountain, let's find him. I'm like, yeah.
Awesome. That's awesome. And Casey and Eliza raising two boys. Casey, especially being in a house full of boys, what's that like for you?
I love it. Honestly, if I knew that I was going to have all boys, I'd had like 10 kids. I love it.
That's
brave.
nuts.
I love it. I on both sides, and my dad's, and when I was with my dad's family, I had 4 brothers, and on my mom's side, I had 2 brothers. Did I have 4? I always have to count them. Adam, Joshua, Josiah, Zach. Yeah, 4 and 2. And there was a couple sisters in there too, but I love raising boys. It's interesting because this is very vulnerable. Sometimes, you know, I'll go through different situations and I literally have to go to Eliza and be like, E, is this like normal? Because I'm a girl. So like, and he's like, yeah, Case, it's fine. What's for dinner? I'm like, okay. I just stressed out about that for like an entire week, but good to know. Thank you.
Oh, that's so funny.
And in those moments, I look at her like, what's even wrong with that?
Of course,
It stays
we play
normal.
football at the dinner table. Of course.
Of course.
Normal.
of course it's normal to hit each other until there's a visible bruise.
Yes,
That's totally normal.
Yes. He said he wanted to wrestle. That's what he
But
gets.
aren't they gonna grow up to be violent criminals? No.
Now on the flip side, Kendra, do you think it was rough for your dad not having any boys in the house and just full of girls?
So he thought that both my sister and I were going to be a boy, like before we were born. He just believed that we were going to be boys. We were not.
Oh, God.
I mean, I think that he probably likes it a lot more than he admits, because the way my dad loves is gifts. And so he would just take us shopping, and he'd sit in the mall with his book, while us girls go shopping. And so that's just how he brought us on great vacations. So I think deep down inside, he loved it, because that's just how he is. But it was fun, just all us girls, and then my dad just kind of being the king of the house. It was cool.
There you go. That's so cool. All right. So moving on to our next question. What advice would you give to a person who is in a relationship with a non-believer that refuses to have their children learn about Jesus? I'd love to start this one off with Robbie Joe and Pastor Luke, and even in the subtopics of maybe you're in a relationship with a non-believer, but maybe you're single and you don't know what to do, or maybe you're in a relationship but you're not married yet, or you're in a relationship and you're married and have kids. There's so many different aspects of this question. So however you want to attack that one first.
I think just as a preface, default disclaimer kind of thing, sometimes we end up in situations where there isn't a perfect answer. Usually it's because we went somewhere we shouldn't have gone, and then there isn't like a way to just undo it. Like, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's just take it all back. You've come down a path so far, and now there are a lot of bad options, maybe some really bad ones, and some that are like, okay, that's only so bad. And so sometimes we have to choose amongst a lot of options that are bad. And again, not always your own fault, but sometimes your own fault. And so ideally, you'd have conversations like this beforehand. Right, you get before kids are involved. You learn these things in a dating relationship, in premarital counseling. You'd hash these out and figure out the plan, or figure out that it isn't going to work. But that's the ideal, and sometimes we end up in a little more of a real situation.
So I think part of your question was if the other half refuses to let you maybe take them to church, or that's a tough one. I mean, that's really when they refuse to let you. That's where I feel like your life shining, right? Let your light shine. That's where I feel like you are doing a lot of behind the scenes praying. I hate to say behind their back, telling them about Jesus, but that's where maybe you're doing a lot more of the let your light shine, more than the actual words. But I mean, if they're just not wanting to go with you to church, those kinds of things, there's a lot you can do. Reading to your kids, praying for your kids, bringing them to church if the other half allows. I think those are huge things that kids, like Sandra was saying, she remembers her mom doing, and Noah remembering his mother. Taking him, saying those things, and the things that they'll remember is that, and Ermie's mom, when his father was serving, that she took the reins, right? And so hopefully there are seeds you can plant, even though maybe not really verbal, loud ones.
That's good. What else? What do you guys think, Pastor Ermie?
Yeah. So I would like to add to what the Monihans has already said. So I would like to go to the Old Testament to emphasize the importance of parents' input into the lives of their kids. So God put the responsibility of the discipleship of children into the hands of parents primarily. So the primary responsibility of teaching children about God is not in the hands of a Sunday school teacher, Rather, it rests on the hands of parents. So in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 6 and 9, God commanded his people that when you go into the promised land, here is what I would like you to do. I would like you to remind and to instruct your children about what I did when you left Egypt. So parents, or if one of the parents is a Christian, that person is responsible to practically live out the Christian life. So we testify about Christ through words and deeds. So that individual, whether it's the father or the mother, need to constantly instill that truth into the minds and hearts of children through words and deeds. And I would like to also quote one person or one family from church history. If you guys are aware of a church father by the name St. Augustine, he lived during the 4th century AD. So this man, he was converted to Christ at the age of 31 or 33, sometime 31 and 33. What happened was his mom was a Christian. Unfortunately, his dad was not. And his mom was introduced to Christ by her maidservant because she was born into a wealthy family. So this maidservant, led Monica's dad to Christ, and later on, she led Monica to Christ as well. And Monica, she was given to marriage to a non-believing person because it was the decision of the parents as to who she should marry during that period of time. Even though she was forced to marry a non-believing husband, she continued to pray for him and for her kids. So first she won her mother-in-law, and eventually her husband also received Christ at a later age. And later on, her children, even though she taught them about Christ, but somehow they, decided to go their own way. And even St. Augustine decided to go his own way. He was involved in lots of sin. He wrote this in his book, The Confessions. So he went to Rome as a teacher. This guy was an educated person. And he made a church, a pastor named Ambrose. They became friends. And Ambrose eventually led him to Christ. But he credited his salvation experience or his conversion to Christ to his mom, because it was his mom's prayer that led St. Augustine to be St. Augustine. After his conversion, his influence extended all the way to Martin Luther King and beyond. So my advice to parents like that in that kind of relationship is, if the children refuse to learn about God, just pray for them. God can do the job. But by all means, don't just relegate that responsibility to a Sunday school teacher, expecting, so-and-so will disciple him. The role of the church is to supplement the responsibility of parents, not to substitute it. Yeah. So that parent who is a Christian in that relationship is responsible to disciple the children by any means possible.
Sure. Noah, and thank you for that, Ermi. It's so good. Noah, where do you think you'd be right now if it wasn't for your mom and for your grandma just pouring into you and then placing you around people who ended up being your small group leaders, your pastors, your mentors? Like, where do you think you'd be?
Not anywhere good, that's for sure. Actually, we were talking about this a little while ago, about if she had made the decision to keep my dad in my life and how different my life would have been because of that. And honestly, having half siblings from my dad's side, I actually recently connected with one of my half brothers, and physically seeing the divide that, the bolstering of prayer has had in my life, and the lack of that in my brother's life it's visible. It's clearly visible. And I think even though I have had slip ups and mess ups, I had the grounding to do that. And even in relation to the question, I know I probably shouldn't have experience in interreligious dating, but that was something that, I thought I could missionary date. This is in high school. And even talking about relationships. And
what is missionary dating for those who don't know?
For those who don't know, missionary dating is basically dating someone outside of the faith, because you will somehow miraculously transform into Jesus and bring them to the faith. So I thought that I was some high and mighty person that could do that. And so I dated a Muslim girl in high school. And I actually got super convicted the summer going into my senior year. And so I told her, I was like, listen, I need to refocus my life on God. I'm going to camp. I'm going to the Hartford Project. I need to not feel guilty while I'm doing those things. So I stopped talking to her, and I would send her a verse, how the Bible app gives you the verse of the day. I would send her a verse of the day every day in the summer. Thinking that it was a very Christian thing to do. Come to find out, the next fall, she hated it. She was like, why won't you just talk to me? Why are you sending me Bible verses? This is weird. And having the understanding that, you specifically can't transform someone's life, but you can sure plant the seeds, is something that I've seen in my own life. I will not sit here and say that my mom and my grandma have transformed my life, and Jesus has done that. But they very well did set the tone and foundation for me to have something to fall back on. So when I did, make the mistake and have the issue of pride with missionary dating, I could come back and say, wow, this is not how I was taught. This is why I'm being convicted. I wouldn't have had those convictions in the first place if I wasn't founded on that foundation that told me what was right and what was wrong with that moral compass.
That's good. That's so good. We actually have a question here. It says, what advice would you give to parents when children are so attracted to the materialisms of the world? That's an amazing, amazing question.
Listen, we live in America, so we have everything at the access. We can access anything at the tip of our fingers. Ermi, I can't get past what your mother did and how she raised you. That'll be with me forever. But living in America, we have all the conveniences right here, and it's a constant battle to raise our kids in this world, but teach them to not be like the world. They're in the world, but not of the world. And that's a day to day. It's you don't get it right once and then it lasts forever. It's constant. I can only speak from personal experience. It's just a constant conversation. I really appreciated what you said about your mom, that you felt safe to ask questions. I would say that's the first part, is create an environment where your children feel safe to ask questions and safe to come to you. As a parent, you don't have to be perfect. In fact, I tell my kids all the time about a lot of my mistakes, and I don't need to get into details, but it's as simple as, guys, thanks for asking how my day was. I really messed up. In this situation, I chose myself rather than choosing what God had asked me to do. And I had to ask for forgiveness. So it's creating a safe place for them to talk. And then Pastor Bill actually gave me this advice a long time ago. Manny was 2, but we were having a conversation about parenting. He said to me, you only have so many no's with your children, so use them wisely. And that really stuck with me, because unless Eliza and I pack up our family and we move to another part of the world that isn't filled with as much materialism as America is, this is going to be a battle that I fight every day. So I'm careful with the no's that I choose. Some people may say, Casey, you should say no to a lot more things. Eliza and I choose to have very open conversations and save our no's for the things that are a big deal.
I think, Casey, that's really good. I also think, though, that there's, coming from a different place of when the kids were growing up, and because I was a single mom and because they didn't have the dad around, it was so important for me to try to provide everything that I thought that a two-parent home would have, and that meant material things. And so in retrospect and looking back on things and how I could have done things a little bit different would be just really trying to find a balance between, you can have those things and certain things, and I don't know, they weren't really specific, but just thinking of ways creatively to keep them accountable in certain things and setting boundaries with them. And even going back to the original question, one of the things was that I would say, and I think I've said this like to Casey before too, it's like, you know what, control what they can do as long as you can, because there's going to come a time where you can't. Growing up, there were a lot of times, especially when I was a teen, I didn't want to go to church, but I was so scared of my mother that I would go. And so, and I really, again, it was a thing where then I had my kids, and, Noah was a lot easier, but I have my older son, Christian, he would go to church, and I made him go to church until he was 18 years old. And so, as much as you can, you want to give kids freedoms, but you also should create boundaries for them as well. And as it relates to everything really. But so that's just a little bit of advice that I would give is, as long as you can, push and push hard to instill the good path and instill keeping them around the right people. Pick their friends. I would always say that pick their friends as long as you can. And you just do the best you can. And there's no right or wrong way. Honestly, a lot of times we're so hard. This is the toughest job, mothers and parents. I think a lot of you parents that are on here could say it's the most difficult thing you're going to do in life is being a parent, but it's also super rewarding.
If I can...
Oh, who talked?
No.
Oh,
it's fine. It's Mother's Day.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll go, then you go. I'll be quick. One last thing. Try to teach them perspective. Try to remind them that what they see and what they're being raised in is not the entire world. Give them opportunities where they can serve. Eliza and I bring our boys into the city. We bring them into the Hartford Project. We give them opportunities where they're not comfortable, but we're still with them, so they're safe. And it causes them to have perspective shifts. It causes them to realize that the world doesn't revolve around them and that the material things are not. So give them as many perspective shifts as you can. My boys now, we do it so much that it's a joke. They're like, complain about something and they'll be like, oh, I know, Mom. I know. I already know. I'm just so lucky that I have 2 pairs of shoes. I got it. So give them as much of that as you can. Noah?
Yeah, I think from like the perspective of a kid, and especially as it pertains to like materialism and wanting things, obviously we are Christians, but we are also American, and we're gonna have those wants and needs. But I think as a parent, not speaking from a parent, but to parents, I don't think that making Christianity materialistic is, as a way to relate, should be something that is going on. I know a lot of times it's easy to just ask, you know, your kid goes up to you and says, I want this or that. And you say, well, pray for it if God wants it, blah, blah, blah. I think oftentimes, like I've caught myself where the only times I'm going to God is when I want, you know, the next pair of shoes, or I want a new video game, or I want X, Y, or Z. And creating a materialistic Christianity, in a sense, distracts me from a deeper relationship with God. So I think from a perspective of a child, I think what I needed most and what I got most was that the materialism that she provided for me was in the form of experience. So if I was interested in soccer, she took me to soccer practice. She got me on a travel team. If I was interested in being a goalkeeper, she got me special training for that because she could provide it. If I was interested in swimming or volleyball or X or Y or Z or rock climbing or this or that, or archery, she was there to give me the experience. And I think that gave me an in to learn how to first of all, do things myself and learn things myself, but also to not be so materialistic in the sense of just having things to have things. When I did want things, it was, oh, Mom, yeah, my neighbor just took me to the archery range. Can I get a bow for Christmas? It wasn't just, hey, I need a new shirt because this one's old, or what, you know, the materialism wasn't linked to a want for more things, but a want to do more things. And even in that sense, it kind of took the Christianity aspect of it, of asking for more things, to now I'm coming to God and I'm asking God, give me new perspective, like you were saying, Casey, to see how I can help or how I can do this or help that person or be a light in this place.
Yeah.
So, speaking to what you said, Noah, I grew up in a single mom home, and she did the best she could, right? And one of my best memories of my mom was every year I played basketball. I know my very tall stature leads me to play basketball, but we always wanted these brand new shoes, right? These brand new Jordans or whatever, and they were $100, if not more, dollars. And every year my mother, who was a single mother, we'd go, she'd get them. And every year I had the new sneakers that everybody else had because she was such a giver. That was so her. And she couldn't see a $100 pair of shoes go to waste. Her feet were like a half size bigger than mine. She literally cut a little out, and she would wear those for the next year or so till they were really worn out. Yes. And so she made sure I had the shoes that everybody else had, because she was a single mom and she tried really hard, but she made sure that they didn't go to waste. She shoved her little feet in there, and the thought of that. But to speak to the materialism, is your kids remember those things? Like, was I being very materialistic, wanting the newest shoes that everybody else had? Yes. But the memory I have is the selflessness of my mother giving me what she thought I needed and wanted, right? And it's just, those are the kinds of things that we remember of our moms that are awesome.
That's amazing.
I picture her little, she literally cut them with a scissor, like, to get her little toe in there. Like, it was great.
I think too, the big thing is, you know, explaining to your children at a young age, like, okay, how and what I'm going to get you is going to help somebody else. Just starting with like a generosity perspective and influencing your kids on learning how to be generous is so important. From my mom's side, I was the oldest and I hated sharing my stuff with my siblings. But now if there's somebody in need, I will always try to go out of my way to help somebody because of what my parents instilled in me in generosity. And so I think teaching your kids, saying, hey, you know, how is this going to help somebody? Are you able, if we don't buy you shoes because you really don't need them, or materialistic things because you don't need them, how can we help support somebody to go on a mission trip? How can we help support a family during this COVID time? Do you need clothes during this COVID time? Probably not, but is there a family that may need some food, and what we would be spending on your stuff, can that help them? Believe me, children are not going to like that response right away, but over time they'll realize that it's so much better to give than it is to receive. And even the Bible says that. And so I think I forget who said it, but serving is so important. Putting your kids into something to serve is amazing. Send them on a mission trip to Guatemala. Send them to camp. Send them to the Hartford Project if they're old enough. They may not want to go, but when they come back, it's going to switch their perspective in so many different ways, and it's going to open their eyes to a whole new world where it's not about materialistic things. And what happens is, if they grow up being attached to materialism, then they end up, when they get their own job or when they have to pay their own bills, they end up being broke because they just want the next best things.
Right.
They don't know how to save, and they don't know how to tithe, and they don't know how to give. And now you're changing years and years of bad habits when they're older and they're in so much debt. So just
echo
a practical sense.
What I'm hearing Steve say too is, we're never gonna teach ourselves to not be selfish, to not be materialistic, to not have some sinful desire. We have to work on character, on the opposite, right? You're not gonna negatively reinforce it. No, don't do that. No, don't do that. No, don't do that. You're gonna say, yes, do this, and that's how you're gonna overcome everything, all of our natural tendencies towards sinfulness.
I agree with serving. My oldest went to Guatemala last summer, and she's got holes in her pants, and I'm like, please, we need to get rid of this. No, Mom. Yeah, she thinks they're cool. No, Mom, no. I mean, her perspective on things have changed, and she's so young.
I mean, think about how we've grown. I can say for myself, I don't necessarily do the most growing when I'm on the mountaintop and everything is super easy and I'm spoon-fed. Like I grow when I'm forced to be uncomfortable and I'm forced to have some real serious perspective shifts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that right now.
I think though that's where like the balance, what I was talking about, like with kind of trying to balance things, like you're not going to get away from completely eradicating things from materialistic type of things, but making them, offsetting it with, well, you're going to have to work for it to keep some accountability involved in what they're doing, because you have to give a little, but making them work hard and making them work towards something for some of that stuff is really important. And not, I was also thinking about when Noah was talking about the sports, because both of my kids were super involved in soccer, and Noah's coach would say to me, I would say, no, I can't make it on Sunday. I got to go to church. Or I would always say, no, we have church or something like that. And he would be like, you're Italian. Your soccer is your church. What is wrong with you? And I'd be like, no, that's not how it is. But you know what? Those things also create examples of not compromising the things that are really should be at the forefront, and bringing Christ into it. And that way was an example when they were younger.
Yeah, that's literally the example I was thinking in my head, because something I look back and appreciate so much about my parents is they were consistent, always consistent. So for instance, the sports thing, I personally was more of a theater arts type of person. But their biggest thing with sports was, listen, if you have a game on Sunday, that's not going to work for us. Now, obviously things look a little different. Like our church, we have Saturday service. So that's awesome. So not to say that if your kids are doing sports on Sunday that you're sinning or anything, but it was the consistent lifestyle of, this is what comes first and everything else comes after. And so if there was school things, for instance, Friday nights were always like the school socials, and my parents were like, no, you can't go. You have youth group. Youth group comes first, And so that consistency in our lifestyle, I look back on now and I'm so thankful. Or even every Monday night without fail was family night. every Monday without fail. Nothing changed that, you know? And so that consistency I look back on now and I'm so grateful for, because it really taught me so much about my priorities.
Right. Yeah, that's so good. That's you know, and I think that's a big topic. I think that's a big topic for everybody, and just go from there. You know, I think we just have to continue to seek the guidance of God, because every family is different, and at the end of the day, we have to allow the Holy Spirit to guide us in how He wants us to raise our children, you know, versus how we think we should raise our children, or how our parents raised us is the same way we should raise our kids, is not always the answer as well. So I don't know. And I don't have kids yet. But any advice, this is all advice to me, because I'm just learning from you guys.
Well, I'll say one thing. You know, I feel like one thing that we get wrong culturally is we place our children at the very pinnacle of what's most important. And sometimes there's different needs that require that, but overall in life, it is not a requirement for your child to be the very most important thing. Sometimes, you know, like I'm always weary of like, okay, like what are things that are becoming idols in my life? You know, what are the things that I'm putting my trust in? And sometimes we do this with our children. We make our children like the goal of our lives. And that's just not right, not in God's perspective. Children are a gift from God. Children are something that we are called to steward. You know, I mean, when they're babies, often we dedicate them right back to God. Why do we do that? We're saying, God, they don't belong to me. They belong to you. They're on loan. I'll do my best. But doing my best doesn't mean that everything else comes secondary to that. You know, especially if you're married, you know, you didn't make a covenant to raise your children. You made a covenant to be a good husband, to be a good wife. So it's just a perspective thing that I think that we need to have. You know, if you feel this crazy amount of pressure to have to provide every single one of their wants, then clearly there's something wrong with you, not them. And so I would encourage all parents to, you know, just check your heart on that, and make sure that you know that you have peace because you're giving your children the best that you can, and now that you're in turmoil because you can't meet every single one of their desires. You're not a bad parent if you're not able to give them everything that they want. And even sometimes their needs, I bet you're doing a lot better job maintaining their needs than you would give yourself credit for. So don't beat yourself up over not being able to provide every single material thing. Talk to your children. I remember when I was a kid, I would ask my dad questions, and when things got too difficult, he would just say, "Oh, well, you'll understand when you're older." And I would be like, "No, but I want to understand now. Like, I could understand now." And one thing I do with my kids is, I mean, I don't explain everything to my children, again, because they're not my God. They don't deserve an explanation for everything. But I try to talk to them to help them understand finances. Like, children, I would love to get that for you. I would love to have it myself. But if you've noticed, I don't have it. If I don't have it, you're not going to have it either, because we can't afford it. You know, don't be afraid to tell your kids, no, that's just not in the budget right now.
Yeah, so. I love what you said too, because for those of you who are watching who are single, dating, married with no kids, you know, Pastor Sterling and I, we had premarital from Pastor Ian, Pastor Casey. And so what he just said, that whole concept of your children coming second and not being the end all be all of your life, we already, that foundation is already so healthy for us even before we have kids, because we're setting ourselves up for when we do have kids. We already know what our relationship needs to look like, as far as this has got to be the number one, like you and me first before kids, you know? And so I'm so grateful for that influence that they taught us in premarital, is because now, even in the process of trying to start a family, like we rely on that foundation of it's you and me, we're in it together. This doesn't need to be, a battle. This doesn't need to be, whatever it is for parents out there. So it's important, even for you people who are single, dating, like keep that in mind as you go about your life and your relationships in general. Like you have to know your priorities. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. And so we have 5 minutes left, and there's a kind of a good question that we have coming up. And I'd love for Pastor Kendra, to kind of take it. And is it a sin for a Christian mother to have a career outside of the home? What are your thoughts, especially with raising a family, taking care of the spouses, all of the above? Is it a sin? I'm sure that's a question that people are asking. 5 minutes. What do you think?
Like I said, I'm not a mom yet, but I am very passionate about women in ministry and women doing what God's called them to do. And so I think it's a loaded question, and it makes me think back to the sermon series we did probably about a year or two ago called Guardrails. And the whole concept that we talked about was sin is something that's going to look different in everybody's life. So something that's a sin for one person may not be a sin for somebody else. And so I think it's tough when we try to put blanket statements out there of, blank is a sin. Well, there's so much more to it than that. And so for some people, they might be in a situation where a husband and wife, they're in a place where the wife is able to stay home and raise the kids, and how beautiful that is. And she can fulfill God's calling in that way. And then there's other circumstances where they're not able to financially make that happen. And so they do need to go to work. Or maybe there's, a spouse, like in all the couples on here right now, where both are called to ministry, both are called to something where they put their hands to the plow, not only at home, but also in their workplace. And so I think it just looks different for everyone. And that's something that as a couple, you have to decide together and know where God is leading you. As you submit to one another, as you yield to one another in love, those are decisions you have to make, and know for you what that would mean. And what sacrifice it takes to raise a family. And it's a sacrifice for both the husband and the wife, both the mom and the dad, So I don't know if I'm really answering the question the way that people might want me to, but that's kind of what comes off the top.
Sure.
I would say to that, as someone who's worked outside of the home and someone who hasn't, there's guilt both ways, right? Moms, we have guilt sometimes, mom guilt, we call it. And there's guilt both ways. There's guilt of, I'm not showing my kids what it is to be a strong working woman, or I'm not home enough, or things like that. And so just to not fall into that guilt. Like there is no, this is a sin, this is not a sin. Like just don't fall into that guilt. Whatever, like Pastor Kendra said, whatever you feel is right for your family, live in that, do that, and don't fall into mom guilt. Try not to.
Yeah. I think of my mom, right? And so we didn't have that much money, so both of my parents did have to work. And so just to be able to pay bills. But I remember growing up, my mother would never compromise time with her kids because of work, or she never compromised time to be able to get us to church or get us to events because of work. And I think what happens, and maybe this is kind of going alongside of with what Kendra was saying with the guardrails and what is a sin versus somebody else. I think if you idolize your job and you're making your job more important than your husband or your spouse or your children, then I think that's where the issue is. That's where the sin is. Because God first, family, then your job, or job comes after a lot of other stuff. And so I think that's where we might mess up. And that's where I thank my mom so much, where we didn't have much, but we always knew we had her. And that's where I just think of her and the example. So I don't know. What do you guys think, Pastor E?
I think Oh,
Or Casey, yeah.
I'll go. You know what, Steve? She wasn't compromising you, or you didn't feel that way, but she was compromising something else.
Sure.
Because in order for her to be with you, she was either compromising something on her job, maybe an advancement, or maybe whatever, promotion or whatever. What's up, Liam? Or she was compromising her own time. What's beautiful about your mother, though, is that your memory is that she didn't compromise you. And that's awesome. We reference this book all the time, but Andy Stanley has a book, and it's called Choosing to Cheat. And if you haven't read it, you should read it, because it's living this balanced life. Like, everybody wants to live a balanced life, but in order to live a balanced life, you can't do everything at full speed all the time. I cannot be a mom 1,000% of the time, and a husband and a wife to him 1,000% of the time, and a job 1,000% of the time, and take care of Casey 1,000% of the time. So there's some days that, sorry boys, I can't play with you right now because I have to work. And I'm not gonna feel bad that I'm working because you're eating because I'm working. Like, sorry, and then there's other days where it's like, okay, I put in a lot of hours at work. I'm going to take the time today and I'm going to put it into my husband, or put it into. So that's where being spirit-led is so important, because if you are spirit-led, if you're allowing the Holy Spirit to direct you, then you can deal better with that guilt or the feelings of letting down. So, but I think Ermi, I have a question for you really quick. Yes or no? Did your mom work outside of the home?
Yes, she did. She's a nurse by profession. So in fact, she worked for World Vision International. So she had to go to work.
So she's a nurse raising children in a country where she was being persecuted. I'm going to sign off now. See you later. I'm done. I'm all done.
It's awesome.
Well, it is so great to, again, share with you all these topics. Happy Mother's Day to all of you out there, the moms, single moms, married moms, moms to be, people who aren't even have biological children, but are mentors to other people, moms. We love you all so, so much. Noah, would you please close us in prayer today? You're so awesome.
For sure. Dear Lord, we thank you for the time that you've given us to reflect on those who have brought us up in the way that we should go, Lord, who have followed your word and your calling on their life to foster another life, Lord. We thank you for the strength that you've given them to raise us how we should be, Lord, the strength that you've given them to work or to stay home, Lord. I thank you for all of the different walks of life that are represented in this call, Lord, and on this podcast, Lord, that we see such a diversity of experience and just, Lord, a wealth of information and knowledge and wisdom, Lord, that you have provided to all of us. I thank you again for the mothers, Lord, for the provision that they have given us as children. In your mighty name, Lord, I pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. We love you all. And as always, please, if you have any more questions, do not hesitate to email us, to reach out to us. We would love to sit down if you're struggling or need more clarification on something. Our doors are always open, and we would love to talk with you guys about it. Until next week, we will see you all. And again, happy Mother's Day. Take care.
Bye.
Love you guys.
Love you.